Chicken Indian section. Yeah. Nice house. Those houses are built in the 70s, like 50s, 70s. Yeah. Good neighborhoods. They are good.
Everybody ready? All right, we will call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. Get a roll call, please.
Hollers.
Present.
Deacon.
Present.
Hensley.
Present.
Lester.
Here.
Neely.
Here.
Schwartz.
Here.
Spencer.
Here.
Spicer. Wiseman.
Present.
Wright.
Here.
Thanks to everybody for showing up today. As I mentioned at the council meeting Monday night, we're trying something a little bit different this year with the first 4 budget committee meetings occurring over the noon hour, and hope that will aid engagement and certainly should make it a little bit easier for staff since they're here already. Anyway. So without any further ado, Mr. Mayor, here to present your budget.
Good afternoon and thank you. I appreciate everybody being here. 7 of us that went through this last year found it an excruciating process. So we have tried to implement some changes, and I appreciate the chairman working with me and retooling. I want to start off by thanking staff. They have spent a lot of time on this. I'm going to go through the letter very quickly, but Chief is going to go through it in a little bit more detail, and I'm thanking Ms. Perry. I just wanted to highlight a few things, but there was a lot of teamwork that went into this. Obviously, we're going to hand it to you as the council's budget with some recommendations in there of things that I would like to see. I mean, some of the excruciating pain last year you're going to see highlighted. We're trying to clean those things up, and as I talked to staff, I mean, that was one of the directives that I tried to get, that we're going to quit kicking cans down the road, using inflated numbers if it doesn't make sense. And we're going to deal with the pain if it causes it, and you're going to see some pain in there, although they did a very good job of getting a balanced budget. We've got a couple of critical issues that we're probably going to have to look at a multi-year approach to, but there's just no way to address it this year. And I think Chief's going to talk about that as well. But I appreciate their work, all the department directors, staff that was involved. You'll see a little bit different initial go at the budget this year. But again, once we turn it over, it's council's prerogative. I just wanted to go through the letter real quick. You'll see on the front page, we're almost an $80 million operation. I mean, we take responsibility for a lot of things in this community for people, and we all know that we've got a responsibility to expend those dollars efficiently and appropriately. Second page talks a little bit about the changes and modifications. Again, they were very generous to invite me into one of the directors' meetings. We kind of laid out a vision and some of the strategies that hopefully that I've been talking about during my time on council, and certainly the last few months as mayor, but trying to look at how we move this city forward and what types of things that's going to take. Rearranging the meetings. I appreciate council working with staff. I think it's a benefit to us as members that attend this, but also to staff. So I appreciate council working with that. You'll see under the budget structure and changes, some of the modifications we've had to make to address some of the things in the past, and I'm not going to go through those in detail. I think Chief and Ms. Perry are going to address the key ones down through there. We're not going to go through it line by line. And then in item 3, revenue adjustments and some of the things that we're looking at. I know there's been discussions on the marijuana tax, how much we're anticipating. So that's highlighted on the bottom line, and we'll talk further about that. Item 4, again, I think they did a very good job, and I think I commend the directors in working with the team here and looking at ways that we can do cost savings and cuts where appropriate. And, again, we'll walk through some of those ideas. Item 5, modifications. These are some of the things that were caught that need to be accounted for better. I mean, you can put a smaller number in there, but if you anticipate that number being higher, it doesn't help our process at the end of the year. So these are some of the things that were pointed out, and again, I asked them to try to take them into account and figure out how we get to a balanced budget. Item 6 are a couple items that I've asked for, and I would appreciate some discussion from council. A, the public relations coordinator. I think we've got a lot going on in this city. Again, we're about an $80 million operation. I want to make sure the community feels that they're engaged with us and we're doing a good job of talking about things that are going on, projects that we're working on. We have had that position in the past. I understand why it got taken out. It got taken out in a very tight budget period. We're in a tight budget period now, but I think with the types of things that we're trying to do with the new city administrator coming in and exciting opportunities, we have got to get the message out to the community. People are expecting that from us. So we have built that in. It is funded, but again, we're handing it to you at this point. And then we've had some discussions on, is there a better way to do our grants process? So I think there will be a presentation, probably not today, but at an upcoming meeting, and talking about what that would look like. And then, we would have to, you would have to, as a group, decide, if you're going to make that modification, how we're going to fund changes there and what opportunities there might be for enhanced revenue. But those are really two of the changes that I've asked. Again, they've been very gracious to work. And I've heard good comments from some council members. I'm not speaking for all of you, but I think there's been some positive that we've got to do a good job of speaking about what we're doing here and talking about challenges so that the community knows, what's going on in here. And we had a room full the other night. It's nice to look at faces, people coming in. Once we have a real hot button issue, a lot of times people don't come to council, but the newspaper does a very good job of reporting what we're doing, and local media, but we need to be telling our message also. So anyways, I'll get off of that. Talk about pay increase. Some of it we're locked in by contract, but we tried to, we understand the state has made significant increases. We're not trying to compete with them, but we also know that we're in the same marketplace, so we're trying to be fair to our employees. So we're proposing a 3% increase for those non-contract positions, and again, Chief will talk a little bit about that. Proposed benefit enhancements, and I'm going to leave that to them, and I think I'm going to drop all the way down to the last page. Our subsidy for the airport went up a little bit. I mean, we don't put a lot into the airport compared to our budget, but it ticked up a little bit. Transit went down a little bit, and I'll leave it to them to kind of talk about why some of those investments have made a little bit of modification. And the last thing is just thank you for this opportunity. Again, we're trying to do the work of the city. I trust council will come up with something that meets the needs of our staff, our community, our departments, what we're trying to project. So, be glad to answer any questions, but if not, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Fitzwater. Are there any questions from the committee of the mayor? Thanks for that presentation. And just for the benefit of the room, I'll remind everyone, these noontime meetings are slated for 1 hour. When we begin our evening meetings, those are generally slated for about 90 minutes. The next item is the presentation on the proposed budget highlights.
So I'd like to start by saying that we did distribute packets to council, but we also upgraded your iPad, so you should be able to sync and you can find everything there. Once this meeting is concluded, I will present all of the documents on the website for public consumption, since the mayor has now presented his budget. So the packet that was passed out in front of you, we're going to start with Exhibit A, which is essentially the mayor's approved budget. We just want to cover some highlights. Page number 2, total budget expenditures. Again, the mayor covered this. The total expenditures, just over $79 million. $39 million of that is the general fund. Parks and Rec at $11 million. We've got the 4 enterprise funds, with wastewater being the highest there at $11.7 million. And then we've got capital improvements, public safety tax, and some of the other smaller funds that we have. Mr. Chairman, as I go forward, do you want me to ask questions before we proceed to the next slide, or
If it's all right with
someone
you,
just stop me?
yeah, if it's all right with you, Ms. Perry, I think it's fine if the council, if the committee here is just sort of welcome to interrupt with questions anytime they have them, if that's all right.
Perfect. Page 3 are the general fund budget expenditures. So this breaks everything down by the individual departments within the general fund. The one thing that we did want to call out on this particular slide, and a change that has been made for this particular budget process, is that we have removed the emergency management operations from the police department budget, and we have made it a standalone department. So as we move forward, it will be more transparent as to exactly what expenditures we have slated for that particular area. Page number 4, total fund expenditures. So the highlight here, I would say, is the personnel services category. I'd like to point out that the personnel services across the city are at 52.82% of the total expenditures that we have. Change in personnel services this year includes a 2.5% increase for employees that are covered by the FOP or IAFF CBAs and the fire command staff, a 3% market maintenance increase for all other full-time employees. There's a 1% loggers decrease for general and the police groups, a 1% loggers increase for the fire groups, and we've also included a 10% health insurance increase and a 5% dental insurance increase. And just for statistical purposes, I looked at the CPI today, and unadjusted for the 12-month period ending July of 2023 is 3.2%. The 3% increase for the June 23 was the smallest 12-month increase since March of 2021. So just to give you some comparison on how we've got those built in. Page number 5, this is general fund expenditures. We wanted to, again, as the mayor did, call out the fact that we do have subsidies that are transferred out to the airport and transit from the general fund. There's approximately $131,000 for the airport and approximately $1.13 million for transit. Yes.
For the benefit of the room, can you briefly tell us sort of what is in the general fund expenditure group that would not be in the total fund expenditure group?
Sure. So the total fund expenditure group, on that very first page, we list out the variety of funds that we have. So what's not included in the general fund expenditures would be everything on page number 2 besides the general fund. So that excludes Parks and Rec. It excludes the 4 enterprise funds of airport, parking, transit, and wastewater. It excludes capital improvement tax and the public safety tax, as well as workers' compensation, the health insurance fund, and all of the small funds that we have for the trusts.
Any questions on that point? It's important.
It is, and I think, Mr. Chairman, that's what kind of throws some people off is when they see the total fund expenditures and the personnel service line item is 52.82, and then we go to the general fund expenditures, and then it's 79.18. So that's, you want to kind of explain that portion of it specifically?
So from my view, the general fund is mainly a service fund. We are providing service to the citizens, and so I would anticipate that the personnel costs within the general fund itself would be higher. But overall, for all of the expenses of the city, the almost $80 million worth of expenditures, that percentage is lower at the 52% number, and that is what we would anticipate because the total expenditures takes into account all of the project expenses and things like that that we are providing. General fund budget expenditures. This particular slide is broken by department. The one thing we'd like to call out here is in the city administrator department. This is the department that in the budget document now includes the public relations coordinator per the mayor's request. So if you were to look at personnel costs within this particular department, they would be higher because they include an additional staff person.
But just add there real quickly that
That line item and how that's calculated not only includes the city administrator, but also the senior admin assistant that's assigned to the city administrator and the mayor, and then now would also potentially include this communications. Trying not to use the word communications for lack of confusion with communications operators. The public relations coordinator is, and you're gonna have to help me with that because we're just trying to make sure that we don't get confused with terminology and semantics, but that's why that changes. And something I might also mention, if you're trying to kind of get an overview as we talk through some of these things, it might be helpful in your primary budget document on page 6. There is also an organizational structure, an org chart. And again, that is what's proposed, but it is different than the one that was in previous budget documents. So the big file on your iPad, the big document, page 6, shows that org chart of what is proposed. And so that's not final, and there's probably even some other tweaks we could make there, but we tried to give you a kind of a view of what it looks like from a structural standpoint as well.
Page 7, total fund revenues. Again, this is across all funds, but on the page 8 slide, this will be just for the general fund revenues. And there are some items here that we'd like to call out. They are the items that are in yellow. For the general fund revenues, we use the FY22 audited revenue figures, the FY23 adopted budget, and the FY23 year-to-date actuals as the base for our projections. Sales tax. As we go through and start talking about revenues, these will be things that I call out in the revenue model. But sales tax includes an increase of 2.6% over the FY22 actual receipts on top of the previously adopted increases that council approved in the current fiscal year. Franchise and utility tax, it includes a reduction in cell phone utility tax of approximately $240,000. That has been an area of decreasing collections, so we have modified that within this budget. Fees and charges includes a reduction in building construction fees from the current FY23 budget of approximately $76,000. There are several factors there, but one of them, I believe, is that the estimations that we've had in the past have been too high. So this reduction will bring the revenues back more in line with what we're actually receiving. And the last one is in the other category, and this includes approximately $200,000 for the marijuana tax, plus it includes an increase in interest income of approximately $80,000. Marijuana tax will start collections on October 1st, but the anticipation is that we will not see those collections more than likely until mid-December. So we won't have anything really in the current fiscal year, but in fiscal year 24, we do anticipate that there will be funds coming in, and I'll talk about that more within the revenue model.
On the marijuana tax, has the revenue been consistent or has been peaks and valleys? Because do we have something kind of leveled off that we can?
So at this point, we don't have anything that we've been collecting. And if we could put that on hold for just a minute until we get to the revenue projections, I will talk about how I made those projections. And then the interest income of $80,000 increase, we have a decent rate right now based on our banking contract, and so we do anticipate that that will be going up.
I might also mention from a very broad perspective on revenues is Ms. Perry spends a great deal of time, energy, lamenting, getting that accurate. And I just want to convey that to you, that she wants to be as aggressive as she can be reasonably, because she knows that is the desire of council to be to not underestimate and then have overages that then cause confusion and maybe just unspent where it's needed. But at the same time, she does not want to exceed what is actually going to happen and then put us into a much worse situation. So we have had literally thousands of conversations about getting that right. And so she takes that very seriously. And I just want to convey that to you that we feel like we have appropriately ratcheted down where appropriate, but then also kept it where it needs to be to make sure that we're not intentionally sandbagging it. So I'm just going to give you that from my perspective, having had to deal with that over the last few months.
Deal with it. You heard it. Those thousands of conversations may be why he's ready to flee that seat. Just
Carefully chosen words.
Well, strategy that we process dollars, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, maybe we'll circle, if that's okay, we can circle back and really unpack it in detail. Yeah.
So the last slide in this packet is a property tax breakdown that we just wanted to kind of convey to council to make it clear as to how the property tax is broken down. So the average median home value in Jefferson City as of the end of May is $233,847. Based on the property tax rates for '22, a person could expect to pay $2,658.08 in property tax. Of that, you see the breakdown of what the city gets, the county gets, and the school gets. The city gets $247 of that. And just as a sidebar, the county rate that I have listed there actually includes the library tax. Currently, there is a 20 cent per 100 valuation on that, since they did not have the increase approved this week during the vote. And that's the last slide I have here. Anything that you want to cover?
Are there any questions from the committee on the proposed budget highlight presentation? Seeing none. Any other comments from staff or from the mayor on that point? Please proceed to the revenue discussion.
This one will be a little hard to see on the screen, but I did provide handouts, and it will be a document that is available online for everyone to see. So I'd really just kind of like to go not line by line here, but just kind of through the yellow highlighted items, which are the ones that have changed significantly in the projections there. So I'm going to start at the top with sales tax. Again, we built the sales tax with a 2.6% increase on the FY22 actual. And the reason for doing that is because typically we would build that on the current fiscal year's adopted budget and our increase on that. But the actual in '22 is actually more than the adopted budget in '23. So a little more aggressive than we've been in the past, but not realistic. The next highlighted group is the other taxes. Cigarette taxes, they have consistently been in a downward trend. And so we have reduced the anticipated revenue in this budget so that we believe it's going to be more in line with that continued downward trend. The next one is the marijuana tax. And because we have no collections at this point on the marijuana tax, I have tried to evaluate the increase that we had when recreational sales started. So knowing what the increase was from the recreational sales and how much that amounted to, I could extrapolate what a 3% tax would be just on those recreational sales. I have taken the city attorney's advice and looked at the fact that it's quite possible the first months of collections could have been high, something new. But we've really not seen a downward trend in those yet. So I am putting into the budget just over $200,000. If I use the extrapolation of what the increases have been since recreational came online and transitioned that to a 3% increase, that would be about $252,000. But because I have no information or data to go on for that 3% tax, I feel like we need to be conservative until we start seeing something come in.
And I think it's fair to say that's a fairly dynamic market, and there are other players that are potentially entering that market as well. So that could also impact the sales in the city.
The next one I have highlighted is the telephone and cell phone utility tax, which is under franchise and utility taxes. That has actually been trending down fairly significantly, and so we have reduced the anticipated revenues there, and I know there's some ongoing litigations in various places, so we're still waiting to see what happens with all of that. I don't have anything else on the first page that I've really called out, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. I provided this so that you have some notes for each of the revenue lines. If once we finish with these meetings, you have a question on any specific line, I'd be happy to address that.
general.
Sure. One of the things that we did transition or change during this budget process, especially on the master budget document that I provide council, that has a listing of all of the detailed accounts, there is now a column on the right-hand side that says description or justification. As part of this project process, we always ask department directors if they are requesting different amounts in their budget or if they feel the need to justify it, to provide us with that information. Finance will then also put information in there, and it's viewed as a finance note, if there's something that we feel council should be aware of. In the past, that information has never come to you as a council. It has been scrubbed from the file that you receive. I think it's important for council to know some of that information, to know some of the justifications. And so anything that the department director provided will be there, and anything that finance feels the need to call out will be shown as a finance note, and it will also be listed. Same with this document. This is not a document that you have typically been provided as council, but this is what I used to come up with the numbers that you've been provided in your past budget documents. So there are the notes I've made about trends and progress and things like that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at any time once you've had the chance to look at it.
I just want to say I appreciate that you've done this.
Thank you. Second page, the only one I've called out here is building construction fees. Building construction fees, again, I think, as I said in the earlier slide, has been overestimated. There have been some projects that have been included in prior budgets that have not come to fruition. And so this is a more realistic revenue figure for the projects that we currently know about, based on the information that I have been provided by Planning and Protective Services. Page 3, we have the animal shelter donations, which I am calling out here. It looks like previously, and in FY23 this was the case, there was a budget adopted there. I have removed that because all animal shelter donations go to an animal shelter reserve account, and that's done at the end of the fiscal year, so it can't be included for use as part of the general fund. So I've removed it completely so that it doesn't kind of throw our revenue projections off. And then finally, the interest account. As I said, we've increased this $80,000, and that is based on the banking contract that we have and the interest rate that's included in that banking contract.
Ms. Perry, is the animal, like, I know this is random, but is the animal shelter's budget varied throughout different line items throughout this document? It's not one.
So revenue for the animal shelter is included within this section of revenue because it's part of the general fund, general revenue. The expenditure budget will be in the police department section of the budget book. It's listed along with all of the other police department budgets, and I think it's Department 10330. So in the document, 10330 will be animal control. It will have all of the same items that you see for every other department. We treat it as a separate department under the police department.
The thing about the interest rate increases, it does seem kind of low. I guess it's bound by the contract we have.
It is bound by the contract we have. Obviously, that's based on the daily balances, and that's based on all daily cash balances, including our capital project funds. So as those projects proceed and those balances start to decline, the interest will also start to decline. I will say this is a very generous interest rate right now. We were lucky to have signed a contract at a very opportune time. They probably regret the contract. That's really all I have on the revenues. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has, either now or once you have an opportunity to digest everything. You're more than welcome to let me know, and I can respond.
Any other questions currently on the revenue presentation? Seeing none? 5-year financial plan.
Okay, so this will be Exhibit C. As we go through this process, we do some projections that are very, they have very low assumptions, I suppose. We keep revenue pretty low on our assumptions because our revenue has, for the most part, trended pretty flatly. So that's kind of what these exhibits are intended to show you. So we're gonna start off with the general fund 5-year forecast, and this particular document shows no unexpended projections. And what I mean by that is, as the council passed a budget for FY23 and we progress through the fiscal year, there will inevitably be unexpended savings that we have. That unexpended savings would typically roll back to the fund balance at the end of every fiscal year. Unfortunately, we have no idea how much that's going to be. It's all strictly dependent on expenditures through the course of the fiscal year. So this particular document takes into account no item, no unexpended rolling back to the fund balance. So I'm gonna actually look at the 24 approved column. The 24 approved column are based on the mayor's approved budget, what you have before you. And so the total revenues are in that budget at $39 million. It is a balanced budget, therefore the expenditures are in at the same dollar amount. And then when you take everything into account based on the ending fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22, the anticipation is that the ending fund balance at the end of 24 would be 20.99%. Now, I would like to make the caveat here. We have added an exhibit that we're going to talk about at the end of this meeting that will potentially change these figures because it is something that came up just within the last day and the documents I produced were prior to that. So having said that, this is kind of the projection as we stand right now based on the mayor's approved budget that has been passed on to council. You can see the projected out years there. Again, it uses the assumptions on the right-hand side, a 2.03% increase on all revenues, or most revenues, I should say. A 2.5% increase on public safety tax, and the reason for that is because public safety does contribute to the general fund for those CBA contracts with fire and police. And then we've got personnel services at either a 2% increase for general employees or 2.5% for those covered under the CBAs. Most of the expenditures, materials and supplies, contractual services, repairs and maintenance at a 2% increase as well. That's how the outlying years are projected, and you can see at the bottom the direction of the fund balance and kind of what the projected outcome is there. I'd like to go to the second page, and the second page will also be the general fund. And this particular page now shows you a 3% projected unexpended. So there is a yellow line about 2/3 of the way down, and that is essentially what we are saying the unexpended at 3% would be, and what would roll back to the fund balance. I take that back. I'm sorry, it's the line just above the yellow highlighted one. So the line just above the yellow highlighted is now putting that 3% back into the fund balance, and then we're calculating the fund balance as we go. So where the previous page showed at the end of the FY24 approved, the balance was 20.99%. This, taking into account 3% of the unexpended rolling back into the fund balance, puts it at 26.9%. Page 3 is the public safety tax. All of these exhibits are going to be built in exactly the same manner. There's a 24 approved, which is based on the mayor's budget. The assumptions are on the right-hand side of the page, and each of the projected outlying years is based on those assumptions. I don't know how much time anyone would like to spend going through this, but we have one for public safety. And then we also have one for the airport, parking, transit, and wastewater, all of which are calculated in exactly the same manner and all of which have the mayor's approved budget in the 2024 column.
The public safety tax, one that we were looking at first here, does that have an unexpended amount built into it, or am I not reading this correctly?
The public safety tax does not have an unexpended amount. The amount that is listed as the transfer out or expenditures, those are what we anticipate based on the CBA contracts. And so anything that is left from that will roll to the fund balance.
But is it still segregated in fund balance just for public safety purposes?
Yes, yes.
Just a question, why is it projected in 25 and 26 that it decreases from 24, the revenue?
It does not show that the revenue, well, on the third line down, there's a carryover surplus. So what you see there is the amount that's coming to or from the public safety tax fund balance. So in 25, the dollar amount at the bottom, the $390,000, that is what the fund balance is going to, in this case, decrease by. And I'd like to point out, we would anticipate a decrease in public safety over the next couple of years of the fund balance because, if you recall, the FOP contract was implemented in 22. The IAFF contract was not implemented until into 23. And what council approved was for them to take a portion of the funds that they had not been able to utilize in 23 during that first several months of the fiscal year and spread it out over the next 3 years. And so that is what I would expect. I would expect the fund balance would decrease by the portion that they are utilizing that we ended up putting into the fund balance at the end of FY 22 and 23.
So in terms of projected revenues just from collections on this particular tax, the line to look at of what we can say today is the projection is that first R10 line, just sales and use tax, because we can't really project what carryover surplus will be in the future.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? We're doing that? If there's anything notable in the other funds as you go, just you can feel free to hit that. Otherwise,
Really, they include, again, the mayor's FY 24 approved budget. Anything that's notable will essentially, I think, be called out in the department director presentations because that's really what we've used the guidance from department directors when they made their initial requests. Some of which have been modified during the process with the city administrator and also the mayor, but all of these initially came from the department directors.
are there any other questions from the committee on the packet, the financial plan, 5-year plan? Are there other? Oh, Councilman Hours.
Just back to the public safety. Does the fire and the police have a different health insurance pool? Because we're cities self-funded for the insurance, correct?
It is.
So being unionized, they have different insurance
No,
that's.
they are on the same city
That's
insurance
in
as
that
every
line
other
item.
employee. So to make sure that it's clear, the personnel costs, all personnel costs, retirement, health insurance, all of those things. All of those things for every general fund employee are within the general fund portion of the budget document. What we do is we budget the expenditures for those personnel costs, And then we recognize a revenue into the general fund from the public safety tax. And that is the amount that we have the council has indicated in prior budget adoptions that they would like to utilize.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other items that the table would care to discuss?
So the next exhibit you have is Exhibit D. And this is the document that I was referring to that would change potentially the fund balance percentage. I recognize that during the last budget sessions, it was an issue of contention that council worked extremely hard to come up with a balanced budget and at the same time to try and get the fund balance percentage to 17%. And within a very short period of time after adopting that budget, staff then came back to council and said, we need a supplemental appropriation for health insurance, which really kind of then made everything that you had previously done useless because the number was no longer what you thought it was going to be. So this document is an effort to start talking about that before we really get into the weeds on the budget process. And this is a document that I have proposed to Councilman Hensley as well as the mayor that we start presenting when we present the fund balance report that you get either at the monthly council meeting or at the monthly finance committee meeting. What we intend to do is insert a section, and in this case, it's the yellow section in the middle, talking about potential issues that we know are on the horizon that council is potentially going to have to address and deal with. As you can see, that's a pretty significant amount in the yellow section. The biggest of which here is our self-funded health insurance. The self-funded health insurance as of today has a shortage of $1.4 million. We are currently as staff working and having discussions with the mayor and with staff and with outside parties and our broker to figure out how to minimize this situation as we move forward. It's probably going to require some significant changes in the way we've been doing things. But we do want to put it before council as we move on so that it is transparent and upfront and everyone is on the same page as we proceed. So what I have included on here, we have the first one, which is the PD recruitment and marketing campaign. It was introduced at the last council meeting as Bill 2023-033. The request was $50,000. I have marked all of these pending. Council has taken no action. However, they may have to at some point. The next one again is the self-funded health insurance, and then staff has gone through all of the general ledger accounts, and these are some of the accounts that are identified that I consider to have significant shortages. So I'm not sure we need to go into them. You can all see what they are, but we have contractual obligations, insurance deductibles, building and grounds maintenance, vehicle leasing, the PD building and grounds maintenance, and PPS has a salary issue, which was created during the FY23 budget that I'm sure Mr. Smith will go into when he makes his department presentation. So having put all of these things on this list, if council has to deal with this list 100%, that would drop the fund balance percentage to 10.73, which is clearly below our 17%. I'd like to point out that those that are asterisked, staff believes that a substantial portion of those can be covered by unexpended budget authority within the general fund that currently exists. However, we can't determine exactly what that amount will be until fiscal year end. But staff is actively working to be cost conscious in order to cover as much of that as possible. And if the ones that have an asterisk are able to be covered by staff with their current existing budgets, the estimated fund balance percent would be 11.94. I have put some important notes at the bottom of this page to remind you of things that have not been taken into account here. things like revenue overages that we've talked about during our revenue model discussions at council and finance committees. And then also any additional savings that we have, whether that be from unexpended budget authority, vacancies, whatever the case may be.
And this is also based on, this is the current fiscal year.
Correct. This is
calculating in next year's.
correct. This is FY '23's ending. But again, keep in mind that those projections that I provided to you kind of take the ending of FY '22 into account, so.
That percentage, the fund balance percentage is based on the adopted budget.
Yes.
Then
The current, it's the adopted budget of the fiscal year that you're talking
It's
about.
always gonna reconfigure once you roll over
Yes.
into a new budget. Councilman Schultz.
You know, this may not be the best time for it, and we can probably do some of this offline, but can you give me a brief history on when we went to the self-funded, why we went to the self-funded?
I am not able to do that because I don't recall, but I think that I could turn it over to Director Strope, and she could, and even probably Chief.
If I might, what I'd recommend is if we kind of give you maybe the 5-minute version, and then that'll give you something to chew on, and then we can come back to that, because I think it's going to be a bigger discussion, and I think we all recognize that. And so, if that's okay with you, that's what I would propose.
You know, we can just wait and do that. But I guess my last question would just be, do we annually look at our rate of increase for premiums, et cetera, versus a market type insurance policy?
Yes, and let's do the thumbnail. I think that's a good idea, and then we'll come back to really get into some of the detail if you're good with that, Councilman. So let's do that. Okay, if you would.
Yeah, so we do obviously look at the plan every year, look at what our options are. So we were fully insured for a long time. At one point in time, we were with Missouri Consolidated. We left them probably in early 2000s. We were fully insured then for a while with Mercy and then United Healthcare. And then we switched to self-funded at the advice really of our broker and through research. That worked well for a while. Sorry, I can't remember the exact date, but I'm gonna say it was about 8 years ago, maybe. Time just goes so fast sometimes that it's hard to remember. I would say it was about 8, maybe 10 years tops that we went self-insured. And so we have struggled now. We've seen some large increases in claims starting in about 2019 that started eating at our fund balance. So we've been working very hard trying to find ways to minimize our claims expenses, and we also do look at our premiums and compare our premiums that we're charging to the market, to our competitors, to the state. So we always look at how do our rates compare to the state rates, that type of thing. So we do those every year.
Is it, I don't know how to ask this exactly, is the out-of-pocket expense to employees higher now than it would be in a marketplace, market-based insurance policy? In other words, is our fringe benefit percentage higher because of this versus if we were still at Missouri Consolidated, for instance?
The cost to the employees would probably, it depends on the tier, but it probably would be higher if we go fully insured.
We can just wait on that.
And I would also like to point out that part of this need for funds in the self-funded health insurance, we do have one large claim that we currently anticipate will be ongoing. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, but
It just has a substantial impact on this number, and I think kind of more holistically, the reason we're bringing this Exhibit D to you today is we recognize that the 23 budget, as we kind of get close to tapering it down, is directly related to the fund balance in 24. And so we felt like it was important to bring it all to you. But there are some really important caveats that I would add, and that is that we're kind of giving you some of the worst case stuff. And we are going to manage much of this, and and that's why there's all these asterisks. The department directors are managing that. That's what they do. Some of it can be managed, some of it cannot. And so anything that can be, my commitment is to do that. And I know that all the department directors are equally committed to doing that. And so, while I'm not going to say that the sky is falling, and it certainly isn't, we just want you to be aware so there aren't any surprises like there were last year. We heard you loud and clear that was not acceptable to finish a budget and then get hit with a very substantial supplemental right after that. So that's what we're trying to avoid with this conversation. But it does also indicate that there are some things that need to be reviewed deeply, and a change is going to have to occur. And I think health insurance and the self-funded health insurance, the way we're doing it is going to have to change. We're going to have to do something different. And we just also want to be very clear and convey that to you, that's going to have to change in the future, because what we're doing isn't sustainable from our perspective, from staff's perspective.
From my perspective, that supplemental amount is roughly 2% of our entire budget. And that's a red flag to me. So
yeah, it is. There's no doubt, and that's part of the reason we think it's a big enough issue that it needs to be discussed holistically as part of this budget process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a handful of unknowns between where we are right now and where we'll be in the new fiscal year with the newly established fund balance amount and fund balance percentage, right? But I think this is a very helpful start.
Staff's goal is to be as transparent as we can, because I know that has been an issue in the past. So we're making the effort. If there's something here, again, we intend to continue on with this as the fund balance report. If there are things that come up that we anticipate are going to be issues, we'll be adding them on here. So if there are some suggestions that you have in regards to that, by all means, please convey that to us.
And just as a more global topic, we've discussed some things that could be done, and part of the justification for not talking about it historically in this context is, well, we just don't know yet, as you said, Councilman, and that it's still in process, right? And there are ebbs and flows till the end of the budget year that could impact that number. And what we're trying to say is that's true, and it'll be managed, but we want you to see the trends and some of those trends on the horizon.
And to be clear, what I had in mind more was sort of what final number will arrive at for the FY24 general fund budget. And then there's also a certain amount of certain number of dollars that are sitting in fund balance right now that are that are tax receipts that are above what were projected that have not been calculated into this. I don't even know I don't know what that number is. So these, what will probably be an increase in the FY24 budget, and then whatever this excess dollar amount is, how those things balance each other out, is sort of important interplay. But then also, what we'll be staring at in terms of these supplementals. Are there any other questions, comments? Let's go to Councilman Spencer first.
And I appreciate this kind of change in strategy and philosophy. I was probably one of the loudest, most vocal of last year's budget about that exercise of really putting a lot of effort into it and getting that to as close to 17% and then having it all of a sudden deflate. Your efforts and everything is really appreciated, and so just want to echo that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just following up a little bit on the questions I had. The reason why I want to know, and I think a lot of us actually work for the government at some point, is that from a worker perspective, somebody that works for the government, every dollar spent on your fringe is less money that could be given to you as a promotional raise or something like that. And to me, that's frustrating because I would think if you would poll every city worker, would they rather have their health insurance cost $5 more, or would they rather have a $5 bill in their pocket? They would want the cash instead. So everything we spend on a fringe is less money we have that can go towards the individual as you're doing a good job. And so I'm very concerned about this. I think this is something we certainly need to look at and dig in on. So.
Chairman Hensley, have we received all information from staff? I apologize, but I have a hard cutoff at 1, so.
Yeah, and we're supposed to have a hard cutoff at 1 also in about 5 minutes.
We have one more item that I think the chief would just like to bring up
Squeeze that in 5 minutes.
unless you'd like to push it somewhere else.
So we'll talk about Exhibit E really quickly, and we can certainly come back to it. But I wanted to present to you kind of a conceptual idea that again comes from feedback that we received last year in this process and multiple years when we look rearward facing towards money that is collected from the capital improvement sales tax. You know, whether it be how long you've been around, GH, we look back at those collections, and typically those collections are higher than what is already predefined and allocated in those sales taxes. You know, we have the categories and the percentage breakout. And so what we are proposing, and this has been kind of a conversation we've been having internally, and we propose this as part of this budget process, that we look at the money that has been collected but not yet allocated. So it's rearward facing. The money has been collected as part of capital improvement sales tax. And that number just generally is about 1.2, 1.3 million. And the proposal is that, you know, we feel like as part of this process, when we did our scoring exercise for all those pink sheets, we really didn't have any money to put towards those pink sheet items that traditionally, you know, we would like to try to fund. But we felt like if they're eligible for capital improvement dollars, that this would be a good time for council to weigh in on what they think are the highest priority projects based on recommendations that staff has made. And so from that, we said, well, you know, there's probably about 3 choices really. We could just let it roll a year and let the full amount roll over to fund bigger projects. We could spend all of that money, you know, at your direction, or we could do some kind of split. And so that really kind of came up when we were having our kickoff meeting, when I said that what we would like to do is further define the parking lot and maybe with a recommendation of what are the immediate needs. And so the split that we would propose as a starting point would be that immediate needs would be 25% of that 1.2, 1.3 million. And that the 75% split might be more towards the long term, or let that roll to bigger projects in the future. And so what you see in Exhibit E is that breakout and those recommendations. And while I think that every single thing listed here is appropriate and needed, we said, well, if we really had to get down to the brass tacks, what would we recommend as staff, and really from where I sit as the interim, to fund in that immediate need category. Now, it is a little bit more than the 25% at a funding level of $367,000. So everything you see in green there, and some of which are partial funding amounts, is so we're calling, instead of just a generic parking lot, we're calling that the loading zone. So if there's a big parking lot, you know, there's different parts of the parking lot. There's the loading zone, it's immediate stuff. There's the regular parking lot, which is generally, you know, everything else. And then there's kind of the long-term parking, which is going to really require probably bigger, more substantial infrastructure investment, usually grant funds, those kind of things. So we tried to break that out for you and make those recommendations. Certainly, we think it's a good point of discussion. Allocate funds that are capital eligible for council to weigh in during the budget process, again, so that they can address some of those pink sheet requests.
Yeah, and then having them sort of graded like this allows you year to year to sort of see how each one's been treated over time.
And to make sure that everyone understands how this is reflected in the budget, in Fund 46, the current sales tax, there are 2 accounts that are listed in there. One of them is called immediate needs funding that has the 25% in it, and one of them is called long-term funding that has the 75% in it. Again, based on what council chooses to do, it's their prerogative to modify that 25, 75 slightly to fit into whatever structure they would like to. But it is currently listed that way in Fund 46.
Any questions on the final point here? I can't wait until next time. We do have an item on the agenda for public comment. Is there anyone here today, member of the public who would share the public comment? Seeing none, thanks again to everyone for attending today and participating. Our next meeting will be Monday, August 14th at noon, and we are adjourned.
1 o'clock.